Dear friends, this is the story of a girl who memorized the Quran and spent most of her time at her mother's house. What did she do at her mother's house that brought such a severe punishment from Allah? And what did her sister-in-law do to her that brought such a painful punishment from Allah, making her a lesson for others? I request all my mothers and sisters to watch this video till the end because it is a very instructive incident. My name is Kushbu, and I was my parents' very beloved daughter, especially my father, who loved me immensely. My marriage to Salim was arranged by my father, and after marriage, I accepted Salim wholeheartedly as my husband and lived as his obedient wife. Salim was also a very good person. He worked as a laborer, and we were very poor. Our life was very difficult, but Salim fulfilled all my wishes. I also kept my desires according to his income and never left him alone in difficult times. After 2.5 years, Allah blessed us with a beautiful daughter, and Salim was very happy. When he held his daughter for the first time, he cried and said, "Allah has given me a daughter, and I will raise her with great care. I only pray to Allah that her fate is good." Salim did not know what calamities would befall his daughter in her life. Hearing his words, I also cried and prayed a lot for my daughter. And no matter how bad our circumstances were, I was living peacefully with my husband. My mother had passed away, and my father was my only family. I had a brother who is now married. As long as my mother was alive, I used to visit my father's house every week or two. But after my mother's death, my father was left alone, so I started visiting him once or twice a week, spending time with him, washing his clothes, and helping with household chores. But all these things started to bother my sister-in-law. She was angry that I always brought my daughter to my father's house, that my father would be happy to see me. But my sister-in-law gradually turned my brother against us. Now my brother would get annoyed seeing me at his house and would leave quickly instead of meeting me. One day, when I reached my brother's house, my father was waiting for me. My sister-in-law was at home, and as soon as she saw me, she turned her face away and went to her room. Then, while going to the kitchen, she muttered, "Why don't people find peace in their own homes? Whenever you see, they come here." Her words hurt me a lot that a little later, my brother came home, and I had tears in my eyes. I was my brother's beloved sister, and we had spent our childhood together. I was younger than him, but in childhood, whatever I bought from school, I would give it to him. When my brother saw me crying, he asked, "What happened? Why are you crying? Did Salim say something, or is there any problem?" I quickly wiped my tears and said, "No, brother, it's just that your wife turned her face away when she saw me and didn't say a word to me, and then she kept saying different things." I continued, "I come here for father. If your wife doesn't like it, I won't come anymore." My brother heard this and quietly went to his room. When he told his wife about it, she started shouting. She started fighting, and the matter escalated to the point where she said, "Either your sister stays in this house or I do. Whenever she comes, she ruins the peace of the house. If she is married, why doesn't she stay in her own house? She comes here every day with her daughter. She gets free food from her brother." Hearing this, I felt like I had turned to stone. My father started scolding my sister-in-law, and my brother, sister-in-law, and father started fighting. I felt suffocated and began to blame myself for all this. Red heart because of me, there was a fight in their house. I folded my hands and apologized to everyone, saying, "Please forgive me. I will not step into this house again from today." My father started crying and said, "This is your father's house. No one can stop you from coming here." But I remained silent and returned home with my child. From that day on, I never visited my brother's house again. However, my father would come to see me. When I got home, I told Salim everything. Salim tried to comfort me, saying, "Your brother is now married. He has his own life. From now on, you will not go there. If you need to see your father, I will go and bring him here." I remained silent, but internally, it hurt me to know that my brother had changed after marriage. With time, I accepted this fact and moved forward in life with my daughter. When my elder daughter turned 10 years old, one day Salim's phone rang. I picked up the phone and heard an unfamiliar voice. They said, "Mr. Salim has fallen from the factory roof. Please come to the hospital immediately." Upon hearing this, I felt the ground slip from under my feet. I immediately took my daughter and caught a rickshaw to the hospital. Actually, Salim had fallen from the roof while working with the mason where he worked. He was badly injured and his ribs were broken. When I saw this scene, I started crying uncontrollably. I sat down next to his bed, crying. His condition was terrible. The doctors had clearly stated that it was very difficult to save him. Salim, slowly breathing, looked at me and said, "I know I won't be in this world in a few moments, and I just want to say, don't lose courage. Take special care of my daughter and forgive me for any mistakes I made. I didn't want to leave you alone in this world." But his tongue could no longer support him. I lifted my head and saw that Salim had completely quieted down. His soul had departed. My daughter started crying loudly and shaking her father, saying, "Dad, wake up, Dad." But he had slept forever. Seeing this, I collapsed and fainted. When I regained consciousness, Salim's body had been placed in an ambulance. My daughter ran between me and the ambulance, looking at her father. My husband had left this world, and at that moment, we had no relatives or loved ones. Only the doctor and nurse were there trying to console me that I somehow gathered myself and returned home with my daughter. The neighbors had already heard that someone in our house had died, but I couldn't find the courage to call my father or brother to tell them that Salim was no longer in this world. My innocent daughter was still sitting by her father's side, crying and trying to wake him up repeatedly. But he was forever silent now that a little while later my father arrived. When I saw him, I broke down even more and clung to him, crying loudly. My brother and sister-in-law also came a bit later. Salim was taken on his final journey and buried under the soil. My brother approached me and draped a white sheet over me. This was my identity as a widow. There was a time when I had stepped into Salim's house as a bride with a red dupatta, and today, in the same house, I had become a widow with a white sheet. Everything felt like a terrible dream. Sometimes I thought I would wake up and everything would be okay. But this wasn't a dream, it was reality. Salim was no longer with us. My brother and sister-in-law left after a while, but my father stayed with me. At that moment, I needed the support of a loved one. The house we lived in was rented. When my mourning period ended, one day the landlord came. He first expressed his condolences for Salim's death and then said, "Sister, I know you are going through a tough time, but it's been 6 months and you haven't paid the rent. I am also a laborer and I depend on this rent for my living. If possible, please pay the rent so that my situation can improve too." Hearing this made me even more worried. The rent for 6 months was a lot, and I had nothing. My father comforted me and said, "Don't worry, my daughter. I'll talk to your brother. He will pay your rent and take you to his house." Red heart, red heart. When my father returned, I hoped that my brother would help me. But when my father returned, he looked a bit worried. I asked, "What happened, father? Did my brother give the money?" My father, with a faint smile, said, "Yes, daughter, I brought the money. Your brother gave it." A little while later, the landlord came and my father gave him the money. When he turned back, I asked, "Father, did my brother give the money?" My father's eyes filled with tears. He said that he himself is struggling to make ends meet. Where would I get the money from? So I had to borrow money from my friend and told him that I would repay it little by little from my pension. Hearing this, I started crying. I knew that my sister-in-law wouldn't let my brother give that much money. My father also said, "Daughter, now how will we pay the rent every month? Come with me to my house." After paying the rent, I had to pack my belongings. I knew who would pay the rent every month now. I reached my father's house with my father, which was no longer my parental home, but had become my brother's house. Holding my child's hand, I entered the house. Seeing me, my brother and sister-in-law were shocked and worried. Seeing me with my belongings, my sister-in-law immediately said, "Is she going to stay here now?" My father quickly replied, "Who else does she have besides us? From today onwards, she will stay with us." My sister-in-law grumbled and went to her room, and my brother also went to his room with a sulky face. My child was very innocent and still in shock from her father's death, so she remained very quiet that I put all my belongings in my father's room, and we confined ourselves to that one room. I had explained to my child not to bother her aunt and uncle and not to be mischievous with her cousins. My daughter was smart and understood everything that my brother had two sons. The elder son was in matriculation and the younger one was in 5th grade while my daughter was in 4th grade. A few days passed like this. I started doing all the household chores to win the hearts of my brother and sister-in-law. Whatever work my sister-in-law used to do, I did it myself so that they wouldn't feel obliged. In return, they gave me 3 meals a day, and that was enough for me. One day, after cleaning my sister-in-law's room, I came out, and a little while later, my sister-in-law started shouting. She said, "My gold ring, which was on the dressing table, is missing. Where did it go?" When I heard this, my face turned red. I said, "Sister-in-law, I didn't see any ring there." My sister-in-law angrily looked at me and said, "I took it off before going to the washroom and left it there. Did you steal it?" Hearing this, I was shocked. I put my hands on my ears and said, "Why would I do such a thing? What would I do by stealing your ring?" At that moment, my sister-in-law's elder son came out and rudely said, "I saw with my own eyes that Nargis took something from the room and was hiding it." My sister-in-law, furious, came to my child who was studying at that time. She opened her bag and found her gold ring in it. Seeing this, my face turned pale. My child sat there in shock, dumbfounded. At that moment, my brother also came home. My sister-in-law showed the ring and said, "Look, Sahid, your sister and niece's actions." My child, crying, said, "I didn't steal anything. A little while ago, Asif came to me. He checked my bag on the pretext of taking a book and left the ring there." Asif, hearing this, started shouting, I was shocked and confused as to how my brother's son could plot such a scheme. I knew my child's habits well. She could never do such a thing. But I was helpless, so I didn't say anything. They took my child to the room and asked, "Did you steal it?" My child immediately said, "Why would I steal? I didn't do anything." I believed my child's words completely, but I ignored it and confined her to our room. She didn't even come out of the room anymore that a few days passed, and one day, my sister-in-law shouted again. She said, "My gold necklace, which I took out for the wedding, is missing. The jewelry box is now completely empty." Hearing this, I was shocked. I immediately said, "My child is not at fault. Maybe you misplaced it." But my sister-in-law came to my room again and started searching it. Today, Asif again said, "I saw Nargis outside your room." My daughter said, "Today in the street, Asif was showing his friends a lot of money, all 500 notes. They were buying cigarettes from the shop and had bought a lot of things." Hearing this, I was shocked. My sister-in-law, stunned, looked at her child who was standing there with an innocent face. Then my brother, angrily, came forward and started hitting my child. He said, "How dare you accuse my child? Ever since you came, there's been chaos in this house. It would have been better if you had died with your father." Hearing my brother's words, I was shaken. I tried to stop my brother. My father came forward and separated my brother from my child and said, "Why are you hitting the child? When she says she hasn't done anything, pay attention to your children. Maybe your children have stolen. They're always wandering around outside." Hearing this, my brother angrily slapped my father and said, "You are also siding with your daughter. She looks like a thief. Her father used to steal and rob to raise them. That's why they've come to our house now and are stealing our wife's jewelry." My daughter, after being slapped and hearing all these things about her late father, turned to stone. Hearing all this about my husband, I couldn't bear it either. So I screamed, went to my brother, and said, "How dare you say such things about my husband? He is no longer in this world. Let him rest in peace. In a fight between children, you raise your hand against our father. I have full confidence in my child's upbringing, but you should have paid attention to your own children. When our father was saying it, you should have investigated your son as well." At that moment, my sister-in-law came and slapped me, saying, "You live off our scraps and then lecture us. Get out of our house." In anger, I said, "I won't stay. Your hospitality was enough to keep us until now." My brother, also angry, said, "Take our father with you and get out. I can't bear this burden anymore. Don't you dare step into this house again." With that, my brother left. What could I do now? It was beyond my endurance. I packed my belongings out of necessity. When I tried to lift my father, he suddenly fell back. He had become completely cold. I panicked and took him to the doctor. My brother was with me, but the doctor said that our father had died of a heart attack. My sister-in-law immediately said, "This is all because of you." Out of necessity, I stayed at my brother's house for 3 more days because relatives were coming and going. As soon as the mourning period ended, my brother threw me out of the house. Out of necessity, I took my child and went to a nearby hut where beggars lived. There an old woman was sitting. I told her my whole story. The woman said, "Daughter, you can stay with me in this hut. We will manage by begging together." Time passed in this way. I continued begging with my child and the old woman. One day, we passed through the same neighborhood where my brother's house was. The woman said, "Let's go to this house." I said, "No, this is my brother's house. I can't go there." But the woman went inside alone. My child also ran after her into the house. A little while later, my child came running out and said, "Mom, come inside quickly." My brother also came out behind her and immediately fell at my feet. Crying, he said, "Sister, forgive me. I have learned the whole truth. All the thefts in the house were done by my elder son, Asif. After you left, he started robbing and stealing. The police have arrested him, and now he is serving his sentence in jail. Your sister-in-law's body also has strange blue marks. The doctor said she has cancer and is in the final stage. Her body is now filled with pus, and she is writhing in pain, taking her last breaths. She is not even getting the mercy of death. This is all her punishment for falsely accusing you and supporting her son. If possible, forgive us." I said to my brother, "Don't ask for forgiveness from me. Ask for forgiveness from our Father. Because you raise your hand against a person like our Father, you are getting the consequences. Your son is in jail, and your wife is dying in agony." My brother took me to my sister-in-law, who was crying and screaming. She said, "Forgive me so that I can die. Forgive me so that I can find peace in the grave." Seeing her condition, my soul trembled. I said to her, "I forgive you. Pray that our Father also forgives you and that your afterlife is not ruined." My sister-in-law remained in pain for a few more days and then finally died. My brother performed her last rites. Now my brother and I live alone in the same house with my child. We often think that if there were no hatred and deceit in relationships, we would all be living a happy life together. If people didn't have the mindset of putting others down, our lives would be filled with happiness. Those who deceive not only ruin their own lives, but also destroy the lives of innocent and blameless people. Dear friends, if you found this incident meaningful, please share it with your family, friends, and relatives. They will also learn a lesson from it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write Allah Akbar in the comment box. Thank you.